My name is Donna McKinney, and I came to Apex and to Salem Baptist in the summer of 2015. Currently, I'm leading one of the adult BFGs, and I'm also a member of the story team, writing a lot of the stories that we've been sharing with the congregation over the past few months. Over and over again in the Old Testament, we see God saying to the people, remember, you need to remember this. Remember how I brought you out of Egypt. Remember how I led you through the wilderness. Remember how I have given you victory when you were in battle and so forth. And what does Jesus do when he teaches? But he uses stories, and we call them parables. And in his stories, he was bit by bit explaining, revealing, unfolding this idea of the kingdom of God and what it means to be a part of that. So there in the New Testament also we see the importance of the stories. I would say because the stories are so important in the Bible, we can take that and we can look at today here in our community of faith at Salem, that stories can be a really important part of our faith walk and our relationship with God too. One piece of my story is that my husband was sick for a long, long time, a lot of years, for about a decade. And our church family in Alexandria, they prayed faithfully for him to get better, and they supported me well through all those years. But the way that story works is, we woke up one morning in January 2015, and he died. So I think you cannot comprehend what that feels like in your heart until you've actually walked through a situation like that. We all love the rescue stories because they have a good ending. But that's not my story, right? My story is not the story that I necessarily would have chosen to write. I would have written it in a different way. But this is also part of my story. So the morning after he died, I woke up and I got out of bed and I put one foot in front of another. And from that moment until right now, my life can only be described, it can only be framed by talking about God's goodness, God's loving kindness, God's faithfulness at work in my life. So I think that when God is a part of our stories, then we are glorifying Him. We are making His name great when we tell the stories. Telling the stories is not about us, it's about Him, if He's a part of the story. I think as people who maybe are not yet people of faith, they're not yet believers, if as they hear the stories of what God has done in our lives, like we may say, I don't feel qualified to preach a sermon, and few of us would feel qualified to preach a sermon, but we can tell a story about what God has done for us, and that can be its own kind of sermon, right? And through that, there's the making of disciples and ultimately sharing His story because we're talking about God, because we're talking about Jesus. I'm Donna McKinney, and I'd love to hear your story.